You're listening to the story. She was thrown off a cliff for refusing to marry the sheriff, but came back wearing a yellow dress. The sack over her head smelled of mildew and onions, thick with the stench of decay. Mabel couldn't see anything through it, only darkness clung to her face like wet cloth. Her hands were bound tightly at the wrists, the rope coarse and biting. Around her, the air grew thinner, sharper. The sound of boots crunching over snow told her they were nearing the edge. Not a single word had been spoken since they began the ascent, just breathing harsh, impatient, like beasts hiding under human skin. Wind cut against her cheeks, already raw from hours of crying into cold silence. Finally, someone muttered, "You sure it's high enough?" A pause, then another voice answered, rougher, older. She ain't supposed to get up from it. She knew that voice. It had haunted her childhood, her stepfather, the man who once fed her, now offering her to death as if ridding himself of garbage. And all because she had refused to marry the sheriff, a man with a sour temper and fists that flew faster than words. "She brought shame to my house," her stepfather growled. "Do what you have to." Mabel tried to speak, to scream, to protest. But her lips were too stiff, frozen by the wind and sealed by the grief. Her voice had long since fled her. Rough hands grabbed under her arms, lifting her like a sack of potatoes. Her boots dragged across the ice. She felt it then, that sharp drop in the air, the way the ground no longer sat beneath her feet. They were at the cliff. One of the men cursed, "Just throw her already." "My fingers are going stiff." Her heart thudded wildly, the only warm thing left in her body. A shove, a brief scream, swallowed by wind. Then the fall, but the end never came. A sudden jerk wrenched her midair. The sack caught on something. A branch, a rock. Pain exploded through her ribs as she slammed into the cliffside, then tumbled down a slope. She landed not with the final thud of death, but with the painful collapse of a body that refused to quit. Her limbs ached. Her breath came in broken wheezes. She lay there in the snow, half buried, half alive. Above, the voices were gone. They believed her dead. That was the plan. And yet she had survived. Slowly, with effort, she shifted. Each movement was fire under her skin, her arms still tied, her face still trapped in the sack, but her legs. They worked, just barely. She began to crawl. It was all she could do. Like an animal wounded and ashamed, inch by inch she dragged herself through the cold. Her knees screamed. Snow filled her sleeves, soaked her boots, froze her cuts. She didn't cry anymore. She had no tears left to give. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The light changed. Her body shook with each gust of wind. She thought of nothing but crawling. Living. Then dash sound. A snort. Crunching snow, the unmistakable rhythm of hooves. She froze, heart hammering. Was it them again? Had they come back to finish her properly? But no, there was no shouting, no laughter, no boots stomping. Only a scent reached her. Horse leather, wood smoke, and wool. A presence knelt beside her. She flinched. A hand gentle touched her shoulder. She recoiled. Her breath caught in fear. But there was no second touch, just the sound of someone shifting. Then the weight of a thick, fur-lined coat placed carefully over her back. Warmth, heavy and solid. She wanted to speak, to cry, but her throat rasped dry. No words came. Just the agony of trying. The figure said nothing. No questions, no panic. He simply slid his arms beneath her, steady, careful, respectful, like she might shatter. Mabel's body screamed. Pain shot through her ribs. Still, she didn't fight. She couldn't. She was too tired. The man, whoever he was, lifted her with care and placed her across the saddle of his horse. He didn't hoist her like baggage. He held her like something fragile and valuable. His coat wrapped around her tightly, blocking the snow. She could feel the rhythm of his heart against her back. Steady, human, alive, they rode through snow that never ended, her mind drifting in and out. Each sway of the horse jolted her wounds, but the arm around her never wavered. She didn't know if she was dreaming. She only knew that, For the first time in a long while, she wasn't alone. Eventually, the scent of smoke grew stronger. The rhythm of hooves slowed. A door creaked open. Heat wafted out clean, pine-rich, real. He carried her again. The cabin was warm. She heard the fire before she saw it. Then the blankets beneath her, thick and soft, something warm pressed to her wrists. A wet cloth dabbed at her face. The sack stayed on. Still, no words. Then came the sound of a chair being pulled back. He sat. Not watching. Just being there. She drifted into sleep, wrapped in fur and firelight, not knowing his name, not knowing if she could trust him, only knowing one thing: she was still alive. And this time, no one had to tell her she mattered because survival had already declared it. When Mabel woke, it wasn't to pain but to silence. Warmth pulsed at the edge of her skin, unfamiliar and almost frightening. For a moment, she wondered if she'd finally died and stumbled into some kind of winter afterlife, but then she heard it, the gentle pop of a fire, the low whistle of wind trying to sneak through the cracks in the logs. Life quiet, but real. The sack was still on her head. Her hands, though still bound, no longer throbbed. Something soft pressed against her wrists. Cloth. Someone had soaked and wrapped them. Her head spun as she tried to sit up. Her ribs shrieked with protest, but she managed to inch upward, breathing SHALLOWLY. Then came a decision to remove the sack. Her fingers trembled as she reached up, found the knot, and pulled. The fabric slipped off her face like a second skin, revealing the low light of a simple cabin, pine walls, a stone hearth glowing with coals, a single chair pulled close to the bed. The air smelled of wood smoke and stew, and something else clean, water. A basin sat nearby with a damp rag resting beside it. Whoever had brought her here had tended to her. Gently, the chair still held the faint shape of someone who had been sitting in it. Watching, guarding. She didn't know, but whoever it was, they were gone for the moment. She looked down. Her dress, once blue, was stiff with dried blood and melt water. Her hair was a matted snarl down the side of her neck. One of her boots had been removed to ease swelling. A thick wool blanket covered her up to the chest. The weight of it felt like a promise. "You're safe." On the floor near the fire, folded carefully, was another blanket. And on top of it a glove. It was yellow, worn, a woman's glove with frayed stitching at the fingers. Something about it made her throat tighten. It was the kind of thing someone left behind on accident or on purpose when they no longer needed it. Before she could make sense of the feeling, the cabin door creaked. She startled and instinctively scanned for the sack. It sat beside the fire, dry now, but she didn't reach for it. The man who entered wasn't tall, but his presence filled the doorway. His coat was heavy with snow, his boots dripping slush. A rifle hung over one shoulder, but not threateningly. He removed his gloves as he stepped inside, then paused when he saw her eyes open, awake, staring. He looked at her face, didn't flinch, didn't stare. He nodded once, as if to say, "I knew you'd make it." She didn't speak. He didn't ask. Instead, he stepped past her, knelt by the fire, and placed another log on the coals. Then he poured water into a tin cup and set it on the edge of the hearth to warm. After a minute, he placed the cup beside her on a small wooden crate. Still, he said nothing. Her hand trembled as she tried to reach for it. She failed, but he didn't help her, and she was grateful for that. He gave her the chance to try. She lay back, the silence wrapping around her like the blanket. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't cold. It simply was. And somehow, it felt better than words. The next time she woke, daylight slanted through the chinks in the log wall. Her limbs ached, but they felt a little stronger. Her fingers flexed, her toes, still, in one boot, wiggled beneath the blanket. She tested her arms. The bindings had been soaked and gently loosened. She touched the knot and worked it slowly free, feeling her hands again for the first time in days. The cabin was quiet, but lived in. A kettle hissed gently on the fire. A tin plate held a few cold potatoes and a piece of jerky, on a hook near. The door hung a hat and a coat that looked older than the man who wore them. Curiosity pulled her to her knees. Her whole body screamed in protest, but she crawled to the fire and sat near it, letting the heat soak into her bones. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall again, soft and slow. The storm was no longer trying to kill her. It had become something else, a witness. The man returned shortly after, a bundle of firewood in his arms. He didn't seem surprised to find her out of bed. He simply nodded and said, "You'll need boots soon." His voice was low, unhurried, like he didn't care how long she stayed quiet. She stared at him for a long moment, then asked, "Why didn't you take off the sack?" He shrugged, setting down the wood. "Figured you would when you were ready." It was the first real exchange they'd had, and it settled something between them, an unspoken agreement. She was not a prisoner here, not a burden. She was someone healing. That night, he brought her stew. Rabbit, maybe, carrots, salt. He handed her the bowl and turned away, giving her space. When she finished, he took the bowl without comment. He never asked her name. She never asked his. Not yet. Days passed. Her strength returned in small pieces, a step from the bed, a slow crawl to the window, a sip of coffee without spilling it. He remained steady as a clock, splitting wood at dawn, vanishing into the hills mid-morning, returning by noon with food, never noisy, never hurried. A man used to silence, who didn't find it uncomfortable. One morning, her legs failed her. She tried to stand and stumbled. He caught her not with arms, but by sliding a chair beneath her just in time. She flinched when he touched her arm. He noticed. He didn't try again. It wasn't that he was afraid of her. It was that he respected her space the way someone respects a sleeping bear, carefully, with awareness that pain makes all creatures unpredictable. And that night, as he stitched an old saddlebag by the firelight, she asked him, "What's this place?" He didn't look up. "Mine," he said. She nodded, staring at the flames. "You live here alone, mostly." Every now and again, the dog drops by. She blinked. There was no dog. He wasn't joking. It was the first time she laughed, just a breath, but it escaped her before she could stop it. That was how she learned his name. It wasn't something he gave freely. It was something she would have to earn. By the fourth day, the bruises on Mabel's face had begun to fade yellow now, like spoiled fruit. Her lip was still split, and her hair hung in tangled mats against her skull. But she could walk, slowly, carefully, and each time she did, the cabin seemed to breathe a little easier, like it had been holding its breath. She spent much of that day watching Roan, on the name she'd finally learned by accident, move through the rhythms of his life. He was a man who didn't waste anything, not a word, not a gesture, not even the heat from his own breath. Before dawn, he split wood. By mid-morning, he was gone off on that horse of his, somewhere into the frost-bitten hills. He returned before the snow fell heavy again, always with something in hand. Rabbit, jerky, kindling, never blooded, never rushed. He walked like a man who had made peace with loneliness. Mabel, for her part, still said little. Her voice had returned, but she wasn't sure what to do with it. Sound still felt dangerous, like if she said too much, it might summon the men who had tried to kill her. But silence no longer frightened her. Not in this place. That evening, she stood before a cracked mirror in the back of the cabin, one nailed crook to the wall above a rusted basin. Her reflection startled her. The girl who stared back looked like a ghost. Hair snarled, skin pale and blotched. Iced tired for 18. She found a pair of shears in a drawer and took them outside. The cold stung her ankles, snow biting through her socks. But she didn't care. She crouched near the wood pile and began cutting quick, uneven chops. Her hair fell like rope to the ground, hacked off until only tufts remained. It wasn't neat. It wasn't beautiful. But it felt right. When she came back in, Ronan glanced up, saw her, and said nothing. Later, she found a comb placed beside her blanket. She began to speak in fragments, a question here, a comment there. She asked about the weather, about the stew, about the firewood. He answered each one without fuss, never pressing, never surprised. On the 5th day, she stepped outside and stood in the clearing behind the cabin. The world hadn't ended. The hills were still wide and white. The pines still stood tall like sentinels, unmoved by her small story. A coyote's howl curled through the wind, raising the hairs on her arms. She didn't go far, just walked the edge of the clearing, where her steps left shallow prints in the snow. Sometimes she thought she could still feel the cliff under her boots, even though it was miles away. That afternoon, she saw Ronan mending a fence post by the tree line. His sleeves were rolled up, and sweat dampened his shirt despite the cold. His movements were steady, deliberate, not rushed, not angry, just focused. It was the first time she really studied him. He was older than her, maybe in his 30s. Strong, but not threatening. Weathered, but not worn down. He hammered the nail in slowly, then stepped back to measure the line. It was the kind of work that didn't require a voice, just patience. That night, she sat by the fire while he worked a needle through leather. The light caught half his face in gold, the other in shadow. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. He paused, then stirred the coals with the fire iron. "Ronan." It fit him, rough around the edges, plain, but with a weight behind it. She didn't give her name in return, and he didn't ask. The next morning, someone knocked at the door. It was a sound so out of place, so foreign in their quiet world, that it made Mabel freeze where she stood. Her heart raced. Her feet locked to the wooden floor. Ronan was already halfway to the door, rifle in hand, not raised, just present. He opened it slowly. Outside stood a woman wrapped in a heavy green cloak, her face sun-worn and her mouth tight. In her hands, she held a basket, brought eggs. The woman said dryly. Ronan didn't reach for them. His body stayed between the woman and the room. The woman's eyes shifted past him and landed on Mabel. She saw too much in one glance. "Didn't know you had company," she said. "Just a guest," Ronan replied evenly. "Guest, or someone the sheriff's looking for." The air thickened. Ronan didn't move. "You want to leave eggs? Leave them. You want to leave judgment? Take it back with you." The woman's jaw twitched, like she was chewing on something bitter. Then, without another word, she dropped the basket hard on the porch and turned away. When the door shut, Mabel's hands were trembling. She knew. She whispered. She knew. Ronan didn't deny it. That night, Mabel couldn't sleep. Every coyote's howl was a voice. Every pop of the fire was a boot step. The walls felt too thin. She packed nothing, just grabbed her boots and shawl and opened the door. Ronan was already outside, sitting on the porch, rifle across his lap. He didn't turn. Just said, "They won't find you, not unless you want to be found." Her voice cracked. "I don't want you hurt. I ain't afraid of them." She hesitated, then stepped out onto the snow-covered porch. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she said, barely louder than a whisper. He turned to her finally. "You didn't." His gaze held her steady, unafraid. "Then let's help you be someone new." In the morning, she found a piece of linen laid out on the table, along with ink, a pen, and a sheet of paper. A letter. Ronan said, "It can travel farther than a voice. It can be kept." "Used to who?" she asked. "To yourself." Mabel stared at the page for a long time. Then, hand trembling, she began to write. Not to the sheriff, not to her stepfather, to the girl she used to be, the one they tried to kill, to remember her name. The letter was short, but it took Mabel half the day to write. Her hand ached, her ribs still throbbed. But the act of setting ink to paper, of seeing her words exist outside her skin, was the first time she truly felt real again. She didn't write to seek justice. She wrote to survive it. The words she chose weren't loud or angry. They were precise, measured, a declaration, a memory. A reminder to herself, you are not who they said you were. You are still here. When Ronan returned from hauling wood, she didn't hide the letter. She laid it folded and tied on the table, weighted down with a stone. He didn't read it, didn't ask what it said, but he did nod, as if he understood what it meant. That evening, she explored the cabin. Not for clues or curiosity but for tools. She searched drawers, lifted blankets, opened cupboards. Behind the door, tucked into the shadows, she found it. An old yellow dress, faded with time, the hem torn, the stitching coming loose. She held it like it might disappear. It wasn't hers. But it could be. She sat by the fire with a needle and thread. Yellow against yellow. The seams were rough, the repair lines jagged, but it didn't matter. Each pull of the needle was a heartbeat, a rhythm, a restoration. She wasn't sewing a dress. She was stitching herself back together. Ronan returned and saw her working. He paused in the doorway. She didn't look up. And he didn't interrupt. He just passed by quietly, letting her finish in peace. By the time she stood up and tried the dress on, it fit him perfectly. The sleeves were loose, the neckline crooked, but it shone like lantern light against her skin, and that was enough. She wore it out into the snow. The air was cold, but her body didn't flinch. She stood in the yard, the wine to her face, and didn't tremble. Spring came slowly to the mountains. The snow melted in patches, revealing the bones of the land beneath. Bent grass, stone shaped by time, trails where animals had passed. And one morning, as the sun broke through gray clouds, Mabel told Ronan, "I need to go back." He didn't ask why. He just packed supplies and saddled the horse. She didn't explain what she was hoping to find. She only knew that the story couldn't end with her hidden in a cabin. It had to return to where it began. Birch Hollow hadn't changed. The Crook Chapel still leaned against the wind. The saloon still had its shutters missing. The townspeople still carried the same eyes wide for scandal, narrow for truth. Mabel walked into town in her yellow dress. Not beside Ronan, exactly, but near him. He led the horse. She walked on foot. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. His presence was enough, not as a shield, but as a witness. Some people gasped, others looked away, ashamed. No one spoke, until she passed the bakery. Two old women stared. "That can't be. I thought she was dead." Mabel kept walking. The sheriff's horse stood outside the blacksmith's, steam curling from its nostrils. She knew that horse. Its eyes were as mean as its rider. And then, there he was. Sheriff Harding, thick with confidence, eyes sharp like ice picks. "Well," he grinned, stepping into the street. "I'll be damned." Mabel's breath caught. The air around her shifted. But she didn't stop. He stepped closer. "You've got some nerve, walking around in that dress. I thought I taught you what happens to girls who disobey their men." Ronan moved, slightly. "No gun. No words. Just presence." "I'm not your anything," Mabel said. "You were promised to me. You paid my stepfather. Not a judge. Not a court. Not me." The sheriff's smile cracked. "I've got half a mind to bring charges," he spat. "Harboring a fugitive." "She's not a fugitive," came a voice. The crowd parted. Mrs. Godwin, the baker's wife, stepped forward, a folded paper in her hand. She passed it to Mabel, who unfolded it slowly and laid it flat on the nearest hitching post. "Witnessed," Mrs. Godwin said. "Signed by Reverend Cotter. Filed with the judge." In Redwater, the sheriff stared at the paper. His own handwriting glared back at him from the margin. "You've been planning this. I've been surviving." Mabel replied. The wind stirred. Behind her, Ronan remained still, trusting her to handle it. Harding's face darkened. "You think that paper changes anything?" "It changes everything," she said. The preacher stepped forward now, then a stable hand, then the blacksmith's daughter. All of them watched the sheriff like a man losing power one breath at a time. He scoffed. "I'll bury you again." But he didn't move, because this time, she wasn't alone. They left the town behind as the wind picked up. No one stopped them. No one dared. They didn't ride fast. They walked. The yellow dress fluttered like a flag of quiet rebellion. At the edge of the trail, she paused and turned to look back. The town was still there, its crooked buildings, its bitter silence, but it no longer held any part of her. "I used to think I'd never come back," she murmured. "You didn't?" Ronan said. She looked up at him. I came back as me. The sky above the cliff was pale blue, as if it hadn't witnessed the violence that once took place there. But Mabel remembered every detail, the way the snow had crunched under their boots, the way the wind had howled, the way she had felt. The moment her toes left solid ground, she stood there again now, in her yellow dress stitched back together not perfectly, but on her own terms. Her breath hung in the air like smoke. The boulder where she had slammed her ribs was still there. The twisted branch that caught the sack that saved her life still clung to the edge. This was where they tried to erase her. And this was where she had come to leave something behind. She stepped forward and unrolled the parchment, the same letter she had written in Ronan's cabin. She pinned it gently to the rock using a stone, the ink still sharp and unblurred. Behind her, Ronan stood watch. He didn't move to help. Didn't speak. He simply witnessed. They weren't alone. From the woods behind them came bootsteps, deliberate, crunching snow. A handful of men emerged to deputies, and her stepfather trailing behind them, shoulders hunched. Last came Sheriff Harding. He looked tired now. Not from age, but from being outpaced by time itself. You know what this looks like, he said. Voice low. Trespass. Interference with a lawful marriage. There was no marriage. Mabel replied, her voice clear. He smirked. You think scribbling words on paper makes it true? She didn't flinch. I have a judge's signature. To witnesses, a statement from the preacher himself. You had no claim, just a deal made behind closed doors. Harding's face twitched, his temper rising. You're lucky you didn't drown in that snow, he hissed. I didn't, she said. And now I'm here. The wind picked up. The paper rustled softly on the stone. One of the deputies looked uneasy, the other adjusted his belt, but didn't speak. Harding's lip curled. You think this little stunt makes you safe? I still wear the badge. Ronan stepped forward now just one step. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, but his hand rested lightly on the strap. You draw on her, he said calmly. I'll put you down faster than snow falls. Harding stared him down, but Ronan didn't blink. You threatening a lawman? The sheriff growled. You threatening a girl? Silence fell like snow. Harding looked past Ronan at Mabel, at the paper, at the yellow dress, at the fact that she was standing at the very place he had tried to kill her, not just alive but transformed. He took a step back. This town will always believe me, he warned. No, she said. They believed you when I was silent. That's over. Her stepfather shifted uneasily. He hadn't said a word. He wouldn't meet her eyes. You sold me, she said coldly. For land, for pride, for fear, but I am not yours. Not anymore. The deputies didn't speak. Harding's hands curled into fists. Then slowly, he turned away. He didn't say another word. The others followed. No fight. No noise. Just retreat. Mabel stood at the edge of the cliff and waited until their shapes disappeared into the tree line. Then she folded the parchment slowly and tucked it inside her coat. They won't try again, she said softly. No, Ronan answered. You made sure of it. They walked down from the ridge as the wind calmed. The trail wound between trees, through knee-high snowdrifts, and past the hollowed logs of a forest that had seen everything. They didn't speak much. There was nothing left to say. Back at the cabin, Mabel took off the yellow dress and hung it on a wooden peg. She folded the shawl she had worn and placed it beside the fire. Then she sat down and stared into the flames. You still want to disappear? Ronan asked from the chair across the room. She shook her head slowly. No, she said. Not disappear. Just live. He nodded. You've earned it. That night, she slept soundly. For the first time in months, her dreams didn't end in snow. She dreamt of yellow thread, of firelight, of ink on paper, of hands that reached to hold, not to take. Weeks later, the town of Birch Hollow whispered stories. Some said she came back from the dead. Some said she was cursed. Others said the sheriff lost his edge the moment a girl in a yellow dress stood taller than him. Mabel didn't care. She didn't live for their stories anymore. She had written her own, and she had survived. Not just the fall, but the return. She had been thrown off a cliff to be silenced. Instead, she became the echo that outlasted the fall.